Christ be with you.
Peace be with you. Welcome to this Good Friday service taped from Knox United Church in Kenora. Good Friday is a difficult service for many, but here at Knox we have come to understand that the story of Jesus' last hours is not just an old story, but our story. A story that speaks to these troubled times that we live in. May this ancient story reach to you and offer strength and courage for today.
While Jesus was praying in the garden, Judas arrived with a large armed crowd in tow. Judas came up to Jesus and kissed him. Then some men in the crowd came forward and arrested Jesus. Peter grabbed his sword to defend Jesus, but Jesus told him to put the sword away. Jesus challenged the crowd. "Do you think I'm leading a rebellion that you come for me with swords? Every day I sit teaching in the temple." Then the disciples scattered and fled. Everything they had known, everything they hoped for, all that was familiar, all the love and debate and growth they had experienced with Jesus seemed lost to them. And so they slipped into the night, scurrying from the light. They didn't know what else to do. They wondered what would happen to Jesus. Would they too be arrested? The heartache of that night must have been unbearable, separated as they were from Jesus and from each other. Those who arrested Jesus took him to the courtyard of the high priest. They questioned him, but he would not speak or defend himself. They demanded that he answer if he was the Messiah. Jesus said, "You have said so." Then they beat him and mocked him. While this was going on, Peter crept into the courtyard and stood around the fire with others, hoping he could hide in the gathering shadows and flickering flames. 3 times he was asked if he was with Jesus. 3 times he denied it. And then the rooster crowed twice, as Jesus said it would, and Peter wept bitterly for having betrayed Jesus. After this, they took Jesus from the high priest to Pilate.
Let us pray. Path of love, source of life, as we remember your final hours, we find ourselves in troubled times of our own, marked by social distancing and physical hand washing, and we are drawn to see your journey to the cross in a new light. As Christ walked towards the cross with great faith and courage, so may you bless our lives with courage in the face of so many unknowns and questions and undoings. As the disciples scattered from the garden when Jesus was arrested, so we find ourselves scattered, physically as we distance from even those we love the most, but scattered emotionally too, wondering what is next. What will our lives be like? How will we care for one another? In this time of COVID-19, we, like the disciples, have had our lives turned on end in an earth-changing way. As Peter crept into the high priest's courtyard, hoping to hide in the shadows and not be recognized, so we know what it is to feel afraid of the terrifying unknowns that face us all. As we hear again the familiar story of Jesus' final hours, open our hearts to walk this new and unknown path, trusting that you walk with us. May we hear a word of challenge, a word of inspiration, And may we trust that when we walk with great love, we walk a path that always leads to you. Amen.
But when I stand, no path before me clear, when every path seems prisoner of my pain, come with a gentleness which calls my fear, Lord of my helplessness, my victory gain. When all my prayers no answer seems to bring, and there is silence in my deepest soul, when in the wilderness I find no spring, Lord of the desert places, keep me whole. When the dark Lord of loneliness prevails, and all defeated joy and friendship die, come be my joy, such love that never fails, pierce us the pity of my shadow sky.
The governor, Pilate, asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "You have said so," Jesus replied. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he also gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Now at the festival, the governor was accustomed to release a prisoner for the crowd, anyone whom they wanted. So Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you? Jesus Barabbas, the notorious prisoner, or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" While he was sitting in judgment, his wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with that innocent man, for today I have suffered a great deal because of a dream about him." Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus killed. The governor again said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what should I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" All of them said, "Let him be crucified." Then he asked, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." So when Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took some water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." Then the people as a whole answered, "His blood be on us and on our children." So he released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified.
When you wash your hands, what are you doing? You are removing dirt and grime. I think that when Pilate washed his hands, it was a symbol of handing off a problem to someone else, because it's easier if you don't have to deal with it. Everyone does this sometimes. When we see people call out for help and we ignore them. When we walk by homeless people and do not acknowledge them. When we see wrong being done in the world but do nothing to stop it. This is us washing our hands. When I was younger, I always thought that Pilate was a cruel man and a coward. He washed off a problem and never looked back. I think that this was out of fear and self-preservation. Now that I'm older, I can understand him more. I think everyone can. What would have happened if he had chosen Jesus to be set free? What would have happened if he had listened to his wife? No one knows. Would he have been scorned? Lost his position? He was scared to do the right thing, and he was too happy to be able to hand the decision off to the crowd and not make it himself. Many people fear the unknown. So I leave you with this quote: never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God. Corrie ten Boom.
God weeps as love withheld, as strength misused, as children's innocence abused, until we change the way we love. God weeps at anger's fist, at trust betrayed, at women battered and afraid, until we change the way we win. God please. God cries at hungry mouths, at running souls, at creatures dying without cause, until we change the way we care. God cries. God waits for stones to melt, for peace to seed, for hearts to hold each other's need, until we understand the Christ. God waits.
Holy Week is a time to consider the pain of the world, and this time in history is filled with much pain and many, many unknowns. Today, as we take a look at this wonderful painting by He Qi, Chinese-American artist, we see in the foreground Pilate and Jesus and a servant woman. Jesus' hands are held in wooden shackles that matches the wood in the bowl that the servant woman holds. The profiles, the colors of the faces of the three in the foreground suggest that somehow they are drawn together. Somehow they are a unit in this painting. Prisoner, slave, and great ruler. What do they have in common in the midst of this story? Pilate reaches to wash his hands, his face showing a complete lack of emotion. And yet, the artist has skillfully crafted an interface lower down in the picture that shows us the conflictedness of this moment for Pilate, a conflictedness that we know well in our lives in this time. Pilate is caught in a system of power that just simply doesn't work and isn't true. And in this moment, he understands how untrue that system of power is, this pyramid kind of power that puts one person at the top and others at the bottom. And Pilate, so close to the top of that pyramid, feels so powerless in this moment, powerless to affect change. Powerless because the whole system is built one card after another in a way that if one is removed, everything falls, and all of this is in his hands. Some of the most powerful leaders of the Jewish people, those determined to see Jesus dead, have come to him and asked him to issue an order for crucifixion. You see, Pilate's caught in a system of Roman power in which it's his job to keep the peace. It's his job to make sure that there is no uprising. And he's afraid that if he says no, that the powerful ones have already incited the crowds so much that they will riot and everything will fall. Everything he has worked so hard for. If he's unable to keep the peace, he might lose his job, or worse, his entire sense of security and power, or worse yet, his life. And so Pilate somehow is joined into this small triad of people, feeling perhaps within himself as powerless as the prisoner before him and the servant woman holding the bowl of water. It makes me wonder if this is how our political leaders and the leaders of the world are feeling at this time. Some of them washing their hands of the whole thing and hoping it'll just go away. And others tightening laws, encouraging self-isolation, even removing personal freedoms to save the lives of thousands. Will we find the compassion we need to respond in love, to support the needs of our most vulnerable in Kenora, those who find themselves locked in with abusers, those who find themselves to be homeless or couch surfing and having nowhere to go if they get sick, nowhere to self-isolate? I'm encouraged this week by decision of this community to open a self-isolation center in Kuwaitan at the Rink, so that our homeless ones do have a place that they can go and stay safe and be cared for should they become ill. How will we risk the messiness of this time and make choices that care for everyone in our community, knowing that we are all truly interdependent? As you go into this weekend of remembering, may you be blessed with compassion and courage. Peace be with you.
After Pilate had turned Jesus over to the leaders of the synagogue, they took him to be crucified. They made Joseph of Cyrene carry his cross to Golgotha. And when they arrived there, they crucified Jesus with two others, one on his left, one on his right. Pilate had a sign written which said, "This is the King of the Jews." From a distance, the women watched. Bitter wine was passed up on a stick to Jesus, and after he drank, he breathed his last. At that very moment, the curtain in the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and a great earthquake shook the land, so that many tombs were open. The soldiers were afraid, and they said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." After, Joseph of Arimathea went to Pilate and offered to bury Jesus. Pilate gave his permission. So Joseph and Nicodemus, bringing spices, took the body. Together they wrapped it in linen with the spices according to Jewish custom. And they found an empty tomb that no one had ever used and laid the body there. Then they rolled a huge stone across the entrance and left. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were left sitting across from the tomb.
Were you there? We have all been there. At the foot of the cross, when a friend is bullied, when a trust is betrayed, when a livelihood is lost, when a loved one turns their back or takes advantage for personal gain. We have all been there. Perhaps you are there now. Crucifixion happens in our world today, every day, many times a day. As you go into this night of contemplation, pray for the strength and the courage to stay present to one another in the uncertainty of these times, knowing that God sees a path even when we cannot. Go in peace.